Now, I wanted to ask a simple question that may not seem that simple. Should you ever shoot a spike? Do you shoot spikes? We're not here to judge. You know, I don't like when one neighbor says that I can't believe they shot a spike, or they shot a 4-point, or they shot a yearling buck. And let's face it, and just for clarification, a spike is a yearling buck. A fawn is a fawn. There's a difference there. We talk about that all the time, but I'll see clients confuse that all the time. They'll say, oh, that's a yearling. It jumps out and it's a little fawn, spots. And a yearling is a year and a half old, 15 months old, 16 months old, and then a fawn is a few months old. So there's a big difference between the two. But bottom line is, to each his own. And there's a few reasons to shoot a spike, and we'll discuss why not to. And I think sometimes there's still misunderstandings about this. I know I told Dylan about this, and we created a video, I think it was last year, but I was watching the Outdoor Channel or something, and I don't watch a lot of TV, and I watch it for the sights, the sounds. I used to love the old Drury Brothers stuff, where they're actually going to leases, a lot of their independent contractors. Really enjoyed watching that. A little bit more like what Midwest Whitetail is right now, where guys have leases, they're going out hunting, they're trying to figure it out, they're going after a certain buck. Like those olden days of videos, if you look at it that way. I have a lot of DVDs of the past. So sometimes I turn on a show, I watch it, and sure enough, I do that last year, and I don't even know what show it was, but the person's talking about shooting an inferior buck. And you could tell it was a 2-year-old buck. It just hadn't come close to expressing anything it was going to be. And really, I mean, it was plain as day. They just shot it to fill a spot on their show and to create an episode about it. That was really because the person couldn't have been that uneducated or misinformed that buck would never blossom into something, or that it was an older buck on the way down, even though it was, 140-pound dressed animal, and that it just never was going to amount to anything. So there's that side of it too. Number one, though, why should you shoot a spike? They taste good. It's a young deer. You like venison. It's what you see in the woods, and you want to fill your tag, and you shoot a spike. Really no difference. And this is the thing, we get so hung up on inches. We get so hung up on how many points a buck has. What's the difference in skill level to shoot a spike or a yearling 8-point or a yearling 10-point? They're both yearlings. They're both the same. One just happens to have more antlers. They're going to have the same meat, same body size. One's not inferior than the other. You just don't know what that spike's ever going to become. So someone's happy shooting a 1.5-year-old 8-point or 10-point, but they're not happy shooting a spike, then really they're shooting those bucks just to say they shot a 10-point, say they shot an 8-point, let alone score. And we get so wrapped up in that. Let's just call it for what it is. They taste good. And if you're okay shooting a yearling deer, a yearling buck, then go ahead and shoot it and enjoy it. They do taste good. But there's some reasons not to shoot one. Sometimes people are being misled that, boy, you got to shoot all those spikes. Number two, is that spike inferior? There's been many studies that have shown that it is not. There's many histories of spikes that have become Boone and Crockett bucks, that have become 200-inch deer, that have blown up. And a lot of times the problem is someone's looking at that buck and they're saying, that's a spike, it's inferior. What does everyone say when they shoot it? It was an older buck on the way down. Well, folks, an older buck on the way down, there's a lot of bucks that are still 8 points, 10 points at 11 years old, 12 years old. And they are thick, gnarly. I've seen a true 11-year-old buck, 12-year-old, 13. They didn't even know how old it was in the UP of Michigan. It was a spike with a bunch of points on it. It probably had 5-6-inch bases, a bunch of gnarly little knobs coming out everywhere. You could look at that and say, wow, that thing's messed up. It wasn't messed up, it was just old, really, really old. And, ancient when it's 10 years plus. That's what a spike is, not this clean looking spike that has 6-7-inch spikes and they're pencil thin with about a 3/4-inch diameter base or 1-inch diameter base or whatever it is. That's not on the way down. These bucks aren't inferior. They really aren't. A lot of the studies show that even if there's a slight difference, and there's a Texas study where they measured antler growth and the spikes, 3 points, performed less than the 5-6 points, but it was a difference of, at maturity, a difference of 143 inches on average versus 139. The amounts were so small that anybody would be happy with a, quote, inferior buck. When I go up to the UP of Michigan, I hope to run into an inferior 5-year-old buck. That's a needle in a haystack. I don't care what it is, 6 points, 10 points. It's going to be a beautiful buck. It's going to have a lot of venison on it. It's going to be a big old deer, and it's going to have a really cool looking rack because it's going to be heavy and it will express its uniqueness by then. It won't really matter what it is, if it scores 110 or it scores 180. I really don't care. It's going to be a beautiful buck. Same if I go public land in Pennsylvania. We have bucks around here that were inferior last year, some 4-year-olds. We just weren't going to shoot a 4-year-old. So then you have bucks that look pretty cool. Maybe they have short brow tines. Who knows what they'll blow up to next year. I remember a buck that the guys were after around here in Minnesota was an 8-point. I thought it was really cool. 2 years ago, we only had like 2 or 3 pictures of it. One of those one day after the season ended. Two seasons ago, in the season 2020 to 21. And really cool looking buck. It was wide, but it was one of those the neighbor even said, you know, he's huge body. And it's really not going to amount to much, but I'd love to shoot that because it's an old buck. It might have been 5 years old, 6 years old, 7, I'm not really sure. But this year it turned into a 170 plus clean 8-point. So yes, it was inferior. It was just an 8-point. But it was awesome. It was a huge buck with big 27-inch main beams, huge, giant 8-point that anyone would have been happy to shoot, even though it was inferior, meaning it wasn't a typical 10. It wasn't a typical 12. Obviously, if it was at that point, boy, a typical 12-point at that point could have been another 15 inches on both sides, would have been pushing 200 inches as a clean 12-point. So you could say it was an inferior buck. The bottom line, it was beautiful. You don't know what that spike's going to be, and most of the time folks are shooting a spike saying it's an older buck. It's actually a young buck. They go by body size. Not even looking at the sway in the back and the belly, things like that. It's just look at weight. You know, a lot of these quote inferior bucks that someone's shooting as a spike, they weigh 120, 130, 140. They're just a simple 1.5 year old buck. They're not 200 inches or 200 pounds plus. So really, just ignore that fact that it's inferior. That is not a good reason to shoot one. It never will be a good reason to shoot one. And let's step down to the next one, a nubbing buck. What's a nubbing buck? That's an actual fawn. That's a button buck. You know, it has just little nubs on it. Some of them even turn bone colored by December, January of that same year. But rest assured, it's just a little nubbing buck. It's a fawn. Difference than a spike or that 1.5 year old with its first set of antlers. That's a 1.5 year old deer, yearling buck, or yearling doe. Yearling, there's a yearling and a fawn is completely different. So these fawn nubbing bucks, Dylan mentioned to me there's a little bit of a trend in Pennsylvania. It's interesting, I hadn't heard of this one, and I read a lot of comments on YouTube, and I've heard some goofy ones when it comes to shooting bucks and shooting bucks that are inferior, but Dylan has heard from a couple different individuals that hunters are actually shooting nubbing bucks or button bucks as fawns, because looking at it like they're going to disperse anyway, so we might as well kill them, because then the does will still be there and have more fawns and have another chance of being a buck. But if you're always killing those bucks, the doe has anyways, then what's it really matter? The does don't bring more bucks in during the season. The more does you have, actually the fewer bucks you'll have during the season. There has to be a balance point. There's a balance that attracts the most amount of bucks. The bottom line is, there is a 90% dispersal rate of 1.5 year old bucks if the mother's still alive. If the mother's not alive, that drops to 30%. So that button buck, if the mother's dying, you don't know if that mother's going to die. You don't know if she's already been shot. Sometimes they're together, sometimes they're not. The bottom line is, it has a 70% chance of staying around if the mother's still alive, and that's not all. Believe it or not, a lot of bucks in good, healthy areas where there's no winter survival, like in the deer yards of northern Michigan, UP Michigan, northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, upstate New York, where deer are traveling out of fall areas to go to winter migration and then go into deer yards, where that keeps them alive the entire winter. Literally, if they don't do that, they will die because they'll be caught out in open hardwoods, averaging 180, 200 inches of snow plus, and they just don't have the nutrition. They can't get to food. They're open to predation, and they can't conserve energy because they're not in those green barn effect deer yards of cedar and conifer, heavy conifer, hemlock, whatever it might be. Those areas, they always disperse as a yearling buck. You say always, but probably 98% of the time, just because they need to be taught the way to those deer yards. That's not something that's in their head just to go that way. They're following other deer, and that's where even fawns that are orphaned, the mother's dead, they'll just follow doe family groups down to those deer yards. So they have to be taught that way. The bottom line is, the majority of the country, there's a good percentage of 1.5 year old or fawns that actually disperse. So you've all seen that, where the mother's just kicking on that button buck and kicking him. So if you're shooting button bucks on your land thinking, well, they were going to leave, and I know this isn't a spike topic, but it's close. You could be shooting a nubbing buck or button buck that's already dispersed to your land, just hanging out with another doe family group, and you're actually shooting a buck that would have stuck on your land. So again, you don't know if that buck's going to stick or not. You don't know if he's already dispersed, and you don't know if the mother's going to die and that buck's going to stay anyways. So bottom line, to shoot a button buck, which we have a shortage of bucks, we don't have a shortage of does. And if you think you need to take a deer and lower the deer population, so your answer is a nubbing buck, your answer should always be a doe, because you do have the chance of killing 2 to 3 deer with one shot, meaning 2 to 3 deer, that doe and her offspring for the following year. If you need to reduce doe populations or deer populations in general, you do it by shooting does, and especially mature does. And that's where you need to understand that shooting a nubbing buck is a really bad thing. We have a buck shortage. There's a good chance that buck will stay in and around your land in the first place. Maybe he will disperse, maybe he won't. Maybe that's 50-50 overall, who knows? And bottom line is, I can't believe people are actually doing that. It's one thing to see on TV someone shooting a quote inferior buck that's just a young one, and we still see that today in outdoor shows. But this button buck thing, that's a new thing that I've heard about. It's kind of a wacky, a little bit backwards way of thinking. And I think just an excuse not to shoot does, which it comes in. We have a good video coming out really soon of how too many does destroys your land, and we'll talk about the different ways that happens. But again, not a reason to shoot a young buck just because you think it's going to disperse, let alone it's inferior. Number 4, let's talk about another way, another few ways down here that you'd shoot a spike. New hunters. There's a lot of us out there that have shot the first deer that came in. I didn't even have a really too many mentors growing up in hunting. I didn't grow up in a hunting family, so literally when I shot my first deer, I had someone from church that helped me come out and track it that night. They said, boy, we got to back out. He taught me a lot of really good lessons. His name was Al Bigger. So I saw, Al told me to come back the next day. It was a good excuse for Kevin and I to get off school. We came back as 16 and 14-year-olds and followed up, and were able to find that deer. And taught us a lot just with that first deer. It was a button buck. I was happy to shoot whatever came by. I remember even thinking, I saw a 10-point there the night before, 2 nights before. I was literally shimmying up a tree and sitting on the top of a tree that had blown off. So I was literally just sitting on the top of the trunk. We stood on branches. We had a lot of dangerous things. We didn't have money. We didn't have money for tree stands. Didn't even really know much about them. We were just out there with bows. Mom and Dad got bows for Christmas, and so we practiced for 8-9 months and went hunting. The bottom line is, new hunters, let them shoot what they want. Who really cares? So that's another good reason. You see a spike, you want to shoot it. I don't think it's necessarily a reason you shoot a deer because you want to shoot a buck. You have a lot of farmland, rich areas. To me, in a lot of these youth hunts, a kid should be just as happy shooting a doe for his first deer as they are a buck. So just to say, well, it's a spike, who shot it, why not shoot a doe? In fact, I don't even understand why. I look at, like, if a kid's not excited about shooting a doe in overpopulated areas, then what does it say about that kid that they only want to shoot a buck? That means they're in it for the glory, they want to brag, whatever that reason is. You should just want to go deer hunting. We were happy seeing a deer when we were first hunting. So new hunter shooting a spike, pretty awesome. I love being a part of that. I tell my clients all the time when I leave, you guys shoot a big buck, send me a picture. But if you shoot a small one, they're like, oh, we never shoot a small one. But I've seen that a lot. Send me a picture. I say, I just like seeing dead stuff with smiling faces. And I love seeing those pictures during the fall. New hunters on the property, could be they're 60 years old, 70 years old. I really don't care. They shoot a spike and they have a smiling face and they're proud of that deer. I want to see a picture of it, because that's the excitement we feed off. Dylan feeds off it. Kevin and Joe will get to experience that for the first time this year with all the clients they're going to, where you get a picture of a smiling face with XYZ deer. Who cares the deer size? And people are happy, and that's what it's all about. We try to develop a property so you can reach your potential. If someone wants to hunt lower than that potential or enjoy it at a different level than we designed for them, then it becomes easy, because we're designing it up here. We're designing for ease of access, entry to attract deer. If someone doesn't want to actually worry about hunting the weather, worry about their access, worry about their scent, at least we're making an attractive property for them that they can hunt well. And then it's up to them to do whatever they want, whatever makes them happy. Number 5, you don't see deer. I've been on this where I have standards here in Minnesota that are slightly different than standards over in Wisconsin, depending on what I'm seeing. The property sizes are drastically different. And then I have different standards when I go to the UP of Michigan and when I go to Pennsylvania hunting, go to Ohio hunting on public land. And I can say the deer that I would shoot in Pennsylvania, that I was really proud of shooting one a few years ago, I went in there, backpacked them out, and I love shooting that deer. Not a deer I would have shot here in Minnesota or Wisconsin. But I was really happy with him there. He was a 3-year-old plus deer. I really don't care what he is. I passed up a 7.2-year-old the day before. This is the opening day of gun season out there in Pennsylvania on public land, big, vast public land. And I just enjoyed the hunt. Dylan and I were hunting in the UP of Michigan. He brought this up. And we had a spike come through the timber. And of course, I'm looking for more antlers. But I can admit, I had the safety off and I was following them. And I'm thinking, man, we walked a long ways in here. And I like shooting deer. And it's always a shame that people will not shoot something for 8 years because they have a standard that they're applying to their goals of harvest that apply to someone else and not themselves. They feel they have to live up to a standard that their land doesn't produce or their hunting style doesn't produce, or both. And so I get excited, and I remember having the safety off on that spike, following it, and just put it back on, and I might have even said to Dylan, I don't know if I said, what do you think? Or something like that. I know Dylan was probably thinking I was going to shoot at one point, but I did that out in Pennsylvania with that 7-point, and there's been other occasions where I was with Mike Mansell from the Breaking Point TV. He was filming out in Pennsylvania with me the one time on public land hunt, and I could see a buck feeding, and we're still hunting. And so I love still hunting the ridges out there. So got down to about 30, 40 yards, and the head was behind a tree, and I literally was shaking at that point. I thought it was going to be a 2-year-old plus buck, which out there, second day during a blizzard, I'd be happy to shoot. And pops his head up, and it's a little 4-point, which wasn't legal in the first place. Had to have 3 on one side, but boy, I can tell you, I think if it had a little tick of a point for a brow tine on the one side, I would have blasted it right there, because it was all about the hunt and a different expectation on one land versus another. So bottom line, hunters all the time, they go out and hunt public land, they don't see any deer. Maybe private land where you have neighbors that shoot everything that moves, and you have a little postage stamp size woods that you can't cut the timber. It's all hardwoods, 10 acres of woods. You really don't see a lot of deer. There's not a lot of reason for them to be there. You can't plant food plots. You can't improve the habitat. Maybe you just don't see a lot of deer, and you want to take a deer and you want to shoot it, and you want to have some back straps on the grill. And that gets me to the last point again. They simply taste good. You know, if you want to shoot a spike, know that you're doing it because you enjoy the venison. Maybe you're a new hunter. Maybe you're an old hunter. You just want to shoot that deer. Just enjoy that process and know that someone else's standard shouldn't be your own. Be proud of that. Enjoy shooting it. But if you're shooting that spike or that nubbing buck for false reasons, and you're using those as an excuse, you're looking at it saying, well, that buck must be on the way down. Probably isn't. I would say 99% of the time it is not. When people say it's a spike and it's on the way down, not to say it doesn't happen. But like I said, the spike that was on the way down in the UP, it was little points and stuff all over the place, giant bases. Those older deer have an older look to them, a very old look. If you're shooting one, do it for the right reasons. You just simply enjoy hunting and you want the venison. You're a first-time hunter. You're shooting your first buck. Who cares? Whatever you want to do. Maybe you're an old hunter. You just want to shoot one. You have a lot of experience. You've shot a lot of deer. You just want to shoot a deer. Maybe it's been a long season. Maybe you only have a few days to hunt. And this is it. And this is what came by. Just again, try not to shoot them because you think they're inferior. Because you think that button buck is going to disperse anyways. Those are all false reasons to shoot one. Bottom line, why shoot that spike? There's a few reasons to shoot them and to not shoot them. Bottom line, just enjoy hunting this season, this fall, whatever you shoot, whatever you see. Just have a great time and get out in the woods. Now, I'm excited again this year to host our Camp Kicking Bear charity event. Last year we did it in June, and it was a big success. We were able to raise over $21,000 for Camp Kicking Bear. There's some people that actually made comments that they get sick of hearing about this kind of stuff and whatever else. I think they didn't understand that we're actually raising money. This Camp Kicking Bear is, to me, the #1 children's organization that gets kids in the outdoors, their families, especially a lot of kids that don't have the opportunity to do so otherwise. June 11th, I'll have more details coming out about this, but you can email us for early registration. June 11th, it'd be midday, like 11 to 4 type thing, 10 to 5, 10 to 4. What I do is there's 50 people that register for this. We give that all to Camp Kicking Bear. Well, it's a habitat day. We go out for a couple hours on the property and I show you some strategies that you can take home to your own land. Number 3, we have a hunt raffle for 100 people. the registration for 50 people is $300. That gets you in the door to actually see the property and the land. $100 gets you in a hunt raffle times 100 people. We had Leo from Lower Michigan had a hunt last year, many memories, end of September for a couple days. Number 4, lots of door prizes, Matthews bows, blinds. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we give away, really good stuff for you too. Kids are free. I think we had about 25, 30 kids last year. All proceeds, again, go to Kicking Bear. Every dollar, every dime we raise goes to Kicking Bear. We'll have some other auction. Last year, Chris B came. We might have Kevin Smith, retired Major League Baseball player. I hear that Gary Suter, he's a NHL Hall of Famer. He might show up too. So there's some chance to meet there. And then, of course, Ray Howell. He was here last year. He delivered his testimony. It was an awesome, inspirational talk that he gave to everyone. Hope to see you there. Look for further details on the site and then the description for the video.